I've always maintained that Abbas himself is probably more inclined to go for a two-state solution. The problem is that his hands are tied. He is not in a position to make the kind of concessions necessary in order to reach an agreement with Israel. That is one of the main problems. The second one, the Palestinian community remains factional. So you have significant groups such as Hamas, who still do not want to settle on a two-state solution and would like to have all of Palestine to become the Palestinian state. So he is not free to act to move in the direction of that kind of a solution. Now, what he is using, unfortunately, again, some excuses. For example, he demands that Israel cease the expansion of the settlements first, or release some prisoners that Israel is still holding. But these are really not the issues. Even if Israel was to concede to that, once they sit at the negotiating table, they're still going to face massive, major difficulties to bridge the gaps on various very critical conflicting issues. For example, Israel demands that the Palestinians recognize Israel as a Jewish state, or Netanyahu insistence that Jerusalem remains united, the eternal capital of the state of Israel. These are significant issues, and that is why it's going to take more than just freezing the settlements or releasing prisoners to be able to resume the negotiations in earnest and reach some kind of an agreement. Well, there are several views as far as that goes. Potentially, it could lead to major conflagration, a so-called another Intifada, a third Intifada. But there are some among the Palestinians who say Israel actually is doing this in order to instigate another Intifada, so that Israeli would have an excuse to go back to the West Bank and crack down on all the extremists and basically cause a new havoc and sort of teach the Palestinians another lesson. They cannot keep on challenging and provoking Israel. Some members of the Palestinian authorities are actually rather concerned about it, and they are saying to the Palestinians themselves that they have to keep quiet, continue to collaborate on security matters, because they don't want to give Israel the excuse in order to come back to the West Bank and take some major military activities that could severely undermine and undercut the Palestinian Authority. So the situation is extremely tenuous. There are charges and counter-charges between Israelis and the Palestinians. In the interim, several Israelis have been killed, and a number of Palestinians have also been killed. The disturbances continue. But in the end, sometimes it takes just one other incident or two more incidents that it will precipitate major explosion. It can happen, and I think Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority ought to really take a moment, think about it very carefully, and take all the necessary measures to prevent that from happening, because Israel can go in, win so-called the battle, but it's going to have to pay a price that really it doesn't want to have that kind of burden. That is going to be a victory that's going to be horribly costly to the Israelis. Anyone who surveyed the Israeli-Palestinian conflict going back, say, to the Oslo Accord of 1993, will tell you that neither side really made irreversible commitment to reach an agreement based on a two-state solution. That commitment is still absent today, and we have to keep that in mind. Because what does it mean when I say commitment? You have to be committed either because you simply want to make peace, or because also the reality itself on the ground dictates that you seek that kind of peace. So here, the Israelis and the Palestinians must commit themselves to reaching an agreement because they cannot change the reality on the ground. They coexist, they will continue to coexist, they are stuck with one another, and they don't have any choice but to seek some kind of accommodation. And that is why I feel if you make the commitment, which is necessary, which is dictated by what's going on the ground, then you're going to have to change your approach to the whole process and begin some kind of accommodation. Starting the day with the negotiation, the peace negotiations start, you're going to have to also to change your attitude, both sides, toward one another. And there are many steps that both sides can take to that end. So again, what is missing is that commitment, and sooner or later, they're going to have to recognize that they really will have no choice. That is, should they hold on to their current position? Again, perhaps believing that if they manage the conflict for the last 15, 20 or 30 years, they can continue to manage it for another 20 or 30 years, that is a terribly mistaken assumption. There is a huge restiveness. The Palestinians are extremely restive. The situation in the West Bank is getting worse day after day. And so you cannot count on the fact that things can be sustained for another 10 or 15 years, hoping to improve their position during this period of time. That is not going to happen. And so the sooner they come to that conclusion and commit themselves to move forward to reach an agreement, the better it's going to be for the Israelis, and certainly better it's going to be the Palestinians. Short of that, many things can happen, and certainly the potential for major explosion could take place, and neither side could emerge from that a winner, because both will be losing substantial ground. And one thing else we have to keep in mind, once that happens, it will be impossible to just merely return to the status quo. At that point in time, they're going to have to find a real solution, an end to the conflict. And that is, both people will have to keep that in mind. That is, if they do not reconcile now, they will both be losing ground should another eruption take place. Thus, they need to avoid it at all costs and begin building on there is today rather than starting from scratch.